A man stands in the cold, sterile chamber, his final breath stolen by a system that failed him. The evidence was weak, the witnesses uncertain, yet the gavel sealed his fate. Years later, the truth emerges. He was innocent, but it's too late. These lives were stolen by a system that swore to uphold justice. They weren't just names on a list. They were fathers, sons, and brothers, condemned for crimes they didn't commit. Some begged for mercy. Others met their fate in silence. This is the haunting reality of wrongful execution in the United States. Before we dive into the video, welcome to True Crime Talks, where we uncover chilling true crime stories, dissect complex cases, and illuminate the unanswered questions that keep us up at night. From shocking crimes that shook the world to little-known stories that demand justice, we leave no stone unturned. Join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts by hitting that subscribe button below. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Brian Keith Terrell, a 47-year-old Georgia man, was executed in 2015 for the June 1992 murder of John Watson, a close friend of his mother. Terrell's case stands as a harrowing example of the failures of the justice system, where doubt and uncertainty were cast aside in favor of an irreversible punishment. Convicted of murder after 3 trials, his execution on December 9th was marred by controversy, questionable evidence, and a legal process that failed to acknowledge the cracks in the case against him. The events leading to Terrell's execution exposed deep flaws in the criminal justice system. After years of legal battles, he was denied clemency on December 7th, leaving him with no remaining avenues to fight for his life. His final hours were agonizing, not just emotionally but physically. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a nurse struggled for nearly an hour to locate a viable vein to administer the lethal injection. As the execution drugs coursed through his body, Terrell's last message to those witnessing the event was a silent yet chilling plea. He mouthed the words, "Didn't do it." With those final words, he joined the tragic ranks of individuals executed under a cloud of doubt. But how did Terrell end up on death row in the first place? His journey through the legal system was fraught with inconsistencies and prosecutorial misconduct, factors that should have warranted a closer examination of his case. Terrell was tried 3 times for the same crime, an unusual occurrence that suggested serious flaws in the case against him. His first trial ended in a mistrial due to a deadlocked jury that could not reach a unanimous verdict. His second trial resulted in a conviction, but the Georgia Supreme Court overturned it, citing legal errors that cast doubt on the fairness of the proceedings. By the third trial, Terrell was convicted once again and sentenced to death, despite mounting concerns about the credibility of the evidence used against him. One of the most troubling aspects of Terrell's conviction was the lack of physical evidence linking him to the murder. No DNA, fingerprints, or direct forensic evidence tied him to the crime scene. Instead, the case against him relied heavily on the testimony of his cousin, Jermaine Johnson. Johnson had initially faced a potential death sentence himself, but was offered a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Terrell. This deal significantly reduced Johnson's sentence to just 5 years in prison, a glaring incentive that cast serious doubt on his credibility. Years later, Johnson admitted to defense investigators that his testimony had been coerced by law enforcement officials who pressured him into falsely implicating his cousin. Despite this, the courts refused to reconsider Terrell's conviction. Beyond Johnson's unreliable testimony, other evidence suggested Terrell's innocence. Footprints found near the victim's body were notably smaller than Terrell's, indicating that someone else had been at the crime scene. Additionally, investigators discovered 13 fingerprints at the scene, none of which matched Terrell's. These inconsistencies should have raised significant doubt about his involvement, yet they were dismissed or downplayed by the prosecution. The state's case relied on portraying Terrell as the perpetrator despite these glaring issues. Further complicating the case was the misleading testimony presented by prosecutors regarding an alleged eyewitness. The prosecution claimed that a neighbor had seen Terrell at the crime scene, but in reality, the witness had explicitly stated that the man she saw was not Terrell. Despite this contradiction, the jury was led to believe there was credible eyewitness testimony placing him at the scene. Such misleading prosecutorial tactics contributed to an unjust conviction, highlighting the extent to which the truth was distorted to secure a guilty verdict. During the trial, the prosecutor emphasized the importance of Jermaine Johnson's testimony in securing Terrell's conviction. In his closing argument, he openly stated, "If you never heard anything about Jermaine Johnson in this case, if he had never testified, would you have enough information to make a decision in this case? You wouldn't." This admission underscored just how much of the case hinged on the unreliable words of a single individual who had every reason to lie. As Terrell's execution date neared, his legal team fought desperately to halt the process. They sought a stay of execution, not only due to the overwhelming doubts about his guilt, but also because of concerns over Georgia's execution process itself. In previous cases, defects in the lethal injection drugs had caused prolonged and excruciating deaths. The secrecy surrounding the state's execution procedures only added to concerns that Terrell's final moments would be marred by unnecessary suffering. Unfortunately, these efforts were unsuccessful, and Terrell was executed in the early hours of December 9th. On March 5, 2020, Nathaniel Woods, a 44-year-old man from Alabama, was executed by lethal injection for his alleged role in the murders of 3 Birmingham police officers in 2005. The case against Woods was marred by controversy, with claims of prosecutorial misconduct, coerced testimony, and a glaring lack of evidence linking him directly to the shootings. Despite these concerns, Woods was sentenced to death and ultimately lost his life, leaving behind a legacy of doubt and a call for justice reform. The case against Woods was riddled with several critical issues that raised serious concerns about its fairness and validity. Firstly, there was a glaring lack of physical evidence directly linking Woods to the shootings. The prosecution's case was heavily reliant on circumstantial evidence and inconsistent witness testimony. Additionally, the defense contended that key testimonies were coerced, with witnesses alleging they were pressured by law enforcement to implicate Woods despite their initial statements asserting his non-involvement. Furthermore, Woods' lawyers accused the prosecution of misconduct, including the withholding of exculpatory evidence and presenting misleading information to the jury, such as failing to disclose a key witness's prior identification of a different individual as the accomplice. The effectiveness of Woods' initial defense team was also called into question, as they were criticized for their inability to effectively challenge the prosecution's evidence and mount a robust defense. Lastly, the case brought to light significant concerns regarding racial bias within the justice system, with Woods being African American and his supporters arguing that racial prejudices may have influenced the handling of his case. Kerry Spencer, the actual shooter, received a life sentence without parole, while Woods was sentenced to death. This disparity in sentencing has been cited as evidence of the unfairness of the justice system. Spencer's role as the shooter was never disputed, yet Woods, who was not the shooter, faced the ultimate penalty. Nathaniel Woods, who was executed on March 5, 2020 in Alabama, did not request a special last meal. According to reports, he was served the standard prison meal. He maintained his innocence and expressed peace in his final statement. He said, "I can feel my spirit leaving my body, and I am at peace." This statement reflects his continued assertion of innocence and his acceptance of his fate. Wood's final words were a poignant expression of his resolve and faith in the face of adversity. Robert Roberson's case is a harrowing tale of alleged wrongful conviction, prosecutorial misconduct, and a narrow escape from execution. Convicted of capital murder in 2003 for the death of his 2-year-old daughter, Nicki Curtis, in Missouri, Roberson has long maintained his innocence. His case has been mired in controversy, with serious concerns raised about the fairness of his trial and the validity of the prosecution's claims. On January 31st, 2002, Roberson rushed his daughter to the hospital, stating that she had fallen from her bed and sustained head injuries. Despite medical treatment, Nicki was pronounced dead after resuscitation efforts failed. However, doctors and nurses doubted that her injuries were caused by a simple fall and instead suspected child abuse. Roberson's demeanor at the hospital further fueled their suspicions. The prosecution built its case around the theory that Roberson had violently shaken Nicki, causing her death, an argument based on the then widely accepted but now controversial diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome. However, Roberson's defense contended that Nicki had a history of chronic health problems, including pneumonia, which had progressed into sepsis by the time of her death. Roberson's trial was fraught with serious issues. His defense team was criticized as ineffective, failing to adequately challenge the prosecution's evidence or present a strong alternative explanation for Nicki's injuries. Key evidence that could have supported Roberson's claims was not introduced. Additionally, allegations of prosecutorial misconduct emerged, including accusations that the prosecution withheld exculpatory evidence and presented misleading information to the jury. Despite maintaining his innocence throughout the appeal process, Roberson's attempts to halt his execution were repeatedly denied by both state and federal courts. However, in a dramatic turn of events, the Texas House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence intervened just a day before his scheduled execution on October 17, 2024. The committee held a hearing on Roberson's claims of innocence and due process violations, ultimately forcing a delay in his execution. The fight for a new trial has since ignited a fierce political battle. Texas's top Republicans, along with some on the state GOP's rightmost flank, have pushed back against efforts to revisit Roberson's case. Meanwhile, his supporters, including activists and several high-profile celebrities, continue to argue that the evidence of his innocence is strong enough to warrant a retrial. One of the key pieces of evidence in Roberson's defense is the argument that the shaken baby syndrome diagnosis is junk science. This diagnosis has been increasingly discredited in recent years, with many medical experts arguing that the symptoms attributed to shaken baby syndrome can be caused by other medical conditions. Roberson's lawyers have argued that Nicki's chronic health problems, including pneumonia and sepsis, could have caused her death. In addition to the medical evidence, there were also issues with the way the investigation was conducted. Witnesses claimed that they were pressured by law enforcement to implicate Roberson, even though they initially stated he was not involved in the crime. This coerced testimony was a significant part of the prosecution's case against Roberson. The case has also highlighted the broader issue of wrongful convictions in the United States. In conclusion, Robert Roberson's case is a tragic example of the potential for wrongful convictions and the devastating impact they can have on individuals and their families. Despite the serious issues with his trial and the evidence against him, Roberson narrowly escaped execution and continues to fight for his innocence. His case serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of due process, effective legal representation, and the need for ongoing scrutiny and reform of the criminal justice system. In 1985, an 8-year-old girl, Chandra Whitehead, was tragically attacked in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The initial investigation by the Broward County Sheriff's Office focused on individuals who may have known the victim, as there were no signs of forced entry. Investigators relied heavily on eyewitness accounts, which played a major role in identifying a suspect. Several witnesses provided conflicting descriptions, but days after the incident, a woman identified Frank Lee Smith as someone she had seen in the area. Smith, who had previous encounters with law enforcement, quickly became the primary suspect. He was arrested and interrogated, during which authorities claimed he made incriminating statements. However, there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and the case against him relied solely on witness testimony, some of which later proved unreliable. Despite serious gaps in the prosecution's case, Smith was convicted and sentenced to death. His trial raised concerns about legal representation and due process as his defense team struggled to challenge the weak evidence presented against him. The verdict was based on the jury's belief in the prosecution's narrative rather than concrete proof. Smith spent over a decade on death row, consistently maintaining his innocence and seeking new evidence to clear his name. In the late 1990s, his case gained renewed attention, leading to an evidentiary hearing. During this time, one key witness recanted her previous testimony after seeing a photo of another potential suspect. This new development prompted efforts to conduct DNA testing, which was not available at the time of Smith's original trial. Tragically, before the results could be obtained, Smith passed away from cancer on January 30, 2000. It was only after his death that the DNA evidence conclusively proved he was not the perpetrator. The real assailant, Eddie Lee Mosley, was later identified through forensic testing. Frank Lee Smith's case underscores the importance of legal reforms to prevent wrongful convictions. His story is one of resilience and injustice, highlighting the need for accurate forensic methods, fair trials, and improved legal defense for those facing serious charges. Advocates continue to push for changes that ensure wrongful convictions like Smith's do not happen again. While Smith did not live to see his name cleared, his case serves as a powerful reminder of why the justice system must always prioritize fairness, accuracy, and the presumption of innocence. DNA evidence has since helped exonerate many individuals, reinforcing the need for thorough investigations and careful prosecution practices. Gary Graham, known to many as Shaka Sankofa, was a man whose life was marked by controversy and tragedy. In 1981, Bobby Lambert was shot and killed during a robbery in Houston, Texas. The investigation led to Gary Graham, who was identified by a single eyewitness, Bernadine Skillern. Bernadine Skillern, a 45-year-old clerk for the Houston School District, was in her car at a Safeway parking lot on the night of the murder. She later told police that she witnessed a man pointing a pistol at Lambert's head. In response, she honked her horn, causing the gunman to briefly turn toward her. Almost immediately after, she heard a gunshot, saw Lambert drop his groceries, and watched as the suspect fled the scene. Skillern attempted to follow the fleeing man in her vehicle, but stopped when her frightened children began screaming. Graham was convicted and sentenced to death based largely on Skillern's testimony, despite no physical evidence linking him to the crime. Throughout his imprisonment, Graham maintained his innocence and sought to clear his name. His case drew national attention, with many advocating for his exoneration and calling for a halt to his execution. Despite these efforts, Graham's appeals were consistently rejected by state and federal courts. Before his execution, Gary Graham requested a last meal consisting of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. His final words were a testament to his resolve and faith in his innocence. Graham stated, "I would like to say that I did not kill Bobby Lambert, that I'm an innocent man." He also expressed forgiveness to those involved in his execution and asked for forgiveness from those he may have wronged. Gary Graham, also known as Shaka Sankofa, was executed by lethal injection on June 22, 2000 at the Huntsville unit in Texas. The execution took place at 7 p.m. local time. Graham's execution was met with widespread criticism and protests. Many believed that justice had not been served, given the doubts surrounding his conviction. In August 1986, Michael Morton's life was irrevocably changed when he was wrongfully convicted of the murder of his wife, Christine Morton. Christine was brutally murdered in their home in Williamson County, Texas, while Michael was at work and their 3-year-old son, Eric, was at home. Despite having no history of violence, Michael immediately became the prime suspect. Prosecutors built their case on circumstantial evidence, primarily a note Michael had left for Christine expressing frustration over their lack of intimacy the previous night. This note was framed as his motive for the murder. During the trial, District Attorney Ken Anderson presented a case devoid of physical evidence linking Michael to the crime. His defense team was unaware that crucial evidence supporting his innocence had been deliberately suppressed. Despite the absence of Michael's fingerprints or blood at the scene, the prosecution's narrative prevailed, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The suppressed evidence included key details that could have exonerated Michael. His 3-year-old son, Eric, told his grandmother that a monster had hurt his mother while his father was not home, yet this statement was never disclosed to the defense. Additionally, a bloody bandana found near the crime scene was ignored at trial. When it was finally tested years later, it contained both Christine Morton's blood and the DNA of another man, Mark Allen Norwood. Witnesses had also reported seeing a suspicious man in a green van near the Mortons' home multiple times, but their testimonies were withheld. For over 2 decades, Michael Morton fought to prove his innocence. His case eventually gained attention from organizations dedicated to overturning wrongful convictions, including the Innocence Project. In 2005, attorney John Raley and the Innocence Project filed a request for DNA testing on the bloody bandana. The prosecution initially resisted, but in 2011, a court ordered the test. The results were conclusive. The blood on the bandana belonged to Christine Morton, an unknown individual. later identified as convicted felon Mark Allen Norwood. In addition, Norwood's DNA was also linked to another unsolved murder, that of Deborah Baker, which further corroborated his involvement in Christine Morton's murder. With this new evidence, Michael Morton's conviction was overturned, and he was released from prison on October 4, 2011, after spending nearly 25 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. Michael Morton's case had far-reaching implications, highlighting the grave consequences of prosecutorial misconduct and the necessity for transparency and accountability within the judicial system. Ken Anderson, the former district attorney who prosecuted Morton's case, was later found to have deliberately withheld exculpatory evidence. In a historic move, Anderson was charged with criminal contempt, tampering with evidence, and tampering with government records. He ultimately served a brief jail sentence and was disbarred. Morton's wrongful conviction also spurred legislative reforms in Texas. The Michael Morton Act, signed into law in 2013, requires prosecutors to share evidence with defense attorneys in criminal cases. This act was designed to prevent future miscarriages of justice by ensuring that all relevant information, whether incriminating or exculpatory, is disclosed to the defense. Despite the unimaginable hardships he endured, Michael Morton emerged from his ordeal with remarkable resilience and dignity. He has since become a vocal advocate for criminal justice reform, speaking out about his experiences and working to prevent wrongful convictions. His story is a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of fighting for justice, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. In 2014, Morton published his memoir, Getting Life, an innocent man's 25-year journey from prison to peace, where he recounts his harrowing journey and the challenges he faced both in prison and after his exoneration. His story serves as a powerful reminder of the fallibility of the criminal justice system and the importance of continuous vigilance to safeguard the rights of the innocent.